I have our website down here below. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram. If like Brittany mentioned, we've put together a little resource list, a beekeeping resource list. So if you're interested in that, you can go to our website and you can just email us through the website, or like Brittany said, you can also put your email in the chat, or send her a private chat message with your email. And we'll get you that resource list. Some of my favorite books and movies and different resources out there. So my story, let's see, there we go. My story to beekeeping actually started as a Peace Corps volunteer in 2007 in the East African country of Malawi. I was an agriculture Peace Corps volunteer. I worked with farmers near Vawaza Game Preserve. A lot of those farmers also have, there was a lot of poaching in particular in the village that I lived in. And so my role was to seek out new income generating activities and try and sort of negotiate between the park and the villagers, and try and help with relations in that regard. And beekeeping turned out to be one of the best shared resources. The park actually encouraged the villagers to hang top bar beehives along the park borders, mostly as a deterrent to keep elephants from leaving the game park and going into farmers' fields. So I actually found my first I had a little experience in beekeeping before that, but I feel like I made my biggest leap in the 3 years that I was a Peace Corps volunteer. And this man you can see in the picture in the top left, his name was Bwana Mizito. He was a village headman who was a very humble man and a very knowledgeable beekeeper. And he was actually my first mentor in beekeeping. He taught me loads of information, and we ended up sort of forming a beekeepers association in the village together, and really worked together to try and expand beekeeping. After the Peace Corps, I immediately went and took a job at the Stone Barn Center for Food and Agriculture, working with their livestock, and took over as the head beekeeper there. And I expanded their apiary, and that's when I started teaching beekeeping classes. I was invited to teach at the Brooklyn Grange in New York City. So on weekends, on Sundays, throughout the whole season, I would go down and teach there. And that's where I met my beautiful wife. You can see in the top right corner there, Marlene. She was one of my first pupils there. She was in the first class that I taught there. And yeah, she was working for the UN at the time, and now manages a farm with me in Falls Village, Connecticut, and beekeeping is a big cornerstone of our farm together. These are our sons, Oliver and Orion, down here on the bottom. So, oh, I'm sorry. Let's see. There we go. I should have given Brittany some advance warning about this. I actually want to start this off with one quick warm-up question to all of you, and see if anybody can answer it. You can put it in the chat if you have a guess. How much honey do you think one honeybee will produce in her entire lifetime? And maybe Brittany, you can, I don't know if it's possible to unmute everybody. If somebody wants to shout out an answer, even is more than welcome to. Maybe it's not possible to unmute folks. Anybody have a guess? Do we have any chat here? Well, I'm sorry, I should have given forewarning on that. Oh, here we go, chat. 1 quart, good guess. No, much less than that. Justin Potter's much closer with not much. Definitely much less than a gallon. I want you to think in terms of teaspoons. Any guesses? I'll go ahead and tell you guys. It's whoops, sorry, 1/12 of a teaspoon. So I want you to think about that the next time you put a teaspoon of honey in your coffee or tea. That's 12 bees' entire lifetime in order to produce that honey for you. And what I find totally mind-blowing is that in the course of a season, a colony of honeybees can produce an abundance of 200 pounds of honey. So working together. And to me, that's sort of the ultimate example of a community of individuals working together for a larger cause. As I've been keeping bees over the years, I find more and more astounding facts like these about bees. And I kind of wanted to give you a little taste of that in this presentation. My whole goal here is to really whet your appetite. I want you to get as excited about bees as I do. And I also, to me, honeybees are a great gateway drug to being a naturalist in general. I never really totally paid attention to the bloom dates. I notice things in a different way now that I keep bees, and I see when the first willows bloom, and I'm constantly looking for what flowers are available to my bees. So I think it's a great way to get it into being a naturalist, and also introduces you to other insects and the entire insect world and the many wonders that are available there. So what I want to cover today, like I said, this is really just going to be a brief overview. I really can't get you started in beekeeping from a 45-minute to an hour talk. But I want to get you excited about it, and I want to give you some of the basics. So the primary question that I'm generally asked when people hear that I'm a beekeeper is, what do I need to keep my own beehives? And that boils down to 3 basic categories. You need the right space for it to put your beehives. You need the right materials, including the bees themselves and the hives themselves, but also the right protective equipment and the right tools. So I'd like to give you that. And the right skills or the right knowledge, which I can give you some tips there, but that's going to take a lot more than just this one lecture to go down that path. And we have an answer to that as well. At Beavertides Farm, we host a 10-part beekeeping class that goes throughout the whole season. We had to cancel it last year due to COVID. This year, we're going to do it, and we're going to take safety precautions. So we're going to be doing it all outside. We meet 2 Saturdays every month throughout the beekeeping season. So people will get the chance to learn in the classroom setting. We usually do a 20-minute talk on a different subject every week. And they also get the practical skills. We go out to the hives and work together in the hives, and everybody manages their own beehive. Usually in past years, it's always been with a partner. This year, we're going to do it a little different. People only be partnering up if they are already potted up together. So that's a possibility. If people are interested, please go to our website to learn more about that. So the right space, and that means a lot of different things. To me, the most important criteria for the right space is that you need a good diversity of pollen and nectar sources in your area. What does that mean? It means a variety of different flowers that are blooming throughout the entire year. And, dandelions are a great source of nectar and pollen. So, some of the best spaces are close to unmanaged spaces or less managed spaces. And going along with that, unmanaged spaces is that they're safe from pesticides. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that you set up your beehive right across the street from a golf course that might be using a lot of agrochemicals, or right across the street from a cornfield that's using glyphosate or other pesticides in their field. Here in northwestern Connecticut, a big concern in terms of the right space is safe from bears. So if you look behind me in this picture, you can see these T-posts and these white wires going between those T-posts. That's an electric fence. You obviously don't need as an elaborate of an electric fence as this, but you do need some sort of a protection from bears. And there's very simple systems out there that are affordable and practical. But electricity is the best deterrent from bears. Having a good hot fence right from the beginning, so that the bear that's patrolling your area gets a good shock. And I even bait the fence in the very beginning with a little bit of bacon, so that if a bear does start sniffing around your hives, you make sure that it gets a good shock right on its muzzle, to teach that bear to stay away from the hives. Because once they get the taste for your hives, they're gonna find ways to come back again and again. Safety from the public is also something that should be a consideration. I would say it's not as big of a consideration as you might think. I've kept bees, like I said, in very urban environments in Brooklyn, and I've had my hives on a rooftop, right next to Sunset Park, Brooklyn, where there's thousands of people every day, and without any complaints at all. And this is on a low rooftop where people could actually see the beehive. The reason for that is the entrance is above the pathway. If you look at this hive here in the front, you can see at the bottom board there's a little open slot. All the bee traffic is going to be going in and out of there. So if you have traffic, human traffic, right in front of that, that's when you most likely are going to have a bad encounter. Ideally, if I have a place where I'm most human traffic, I just turn the hive around and I just don't have that entrance facing there. It's okay if it's on the same level with people. It's just as long as the entrance isn't facing where people mostly are. Good sun is actually ideal for bees. A lot of people say, well, shouldn't I find some shade for my beehives? No, actually bees do really well in full sun. So a nice open pasture is ideal. The most important criteria, I think, for the right space, though, is it's accessible year-round. Don't put your hive in a place that you can't get to in the winter, or a place that you have to climb up a mountain or something to get to your beehives, because these boxes you see here, when they're filled with honey, they can weigh up to 45, 50 pounds each. And you want to be able to get your honey easily in and out. So ideally, have your hive in a place that you can actually pull a truck or a vehicle right up to it, and be able to get your equipment in and out quite easily. So the right materials. So like I said, bees are a big part of that material. And there's generally two options for obtaining bees. You can obtain a package of bees, like you see in the picture down below here. That is 3 to 4 pounds of bees. There's a queen in a cage right in the center of them, and they're all clustered around the queen. And when you remove that queen, they're going to be attracted to her pheromones. So you just place your queen in the hive, dump the bees in. The beekeeping class we teach at Beavertides, everybody gets hands-on experience actually installing a package of bees. That's really important to have that experience. And the other option is a nuke, or a nucleus colony. I think the NSA probably has been tracking me for years, because I send a lot of texts and phone calls, either selling or offering to sell or looking to buy nukes. But these are not nuclear devices; these are nucleus colonies. So that's basically a small hive. It comes with frames that you can just transfer right away, frames with drawn out honeycomb, and bees that are already producing offspring. So basically you're just transferring this small transportable hive into your larger hive and letting them grow. The advantage of nukes is you get a faster start. They can build up much quicker. The disadvantage is it's quite a bit more expensive. More on the range of $200 to $250 for a 5-frame nuke, whereas a package of bees, like you see here, is about $125 to $150, depending on your source. Another potential disadvantage, depending on where your source comes from, there is more potential for disease actually in nukes, because you're getting oftentimes old comb, and that can be a harbor of disease. You're getting old beeswax comb, and that can be a harbor for disease. Packages, you can actually treat your package with organic acids to try and knock off any potential parasites. And there's generally, because there's no comb involved, less chance of disease with packages. But if you trust, you have a good local source, I think nukes can actually be a really great option. So the hive itself, you can see here on the right, I have kind of a crude illustration of a Langstroth beehive. And there's two different types of Langstroth beehives that you can get. You can get an 8-frame beehive, or a 10-frame. That frames is referring to the slots of comb inside the boxes. So an 8-frame is significantly lighter than a 10-frame. That's the primary advantage of 8-frame. And I see more and more people just going with 8-frame these days. I mostly run 10 frames, and I think that's more because maybe just an old school mentality, but I have it in my head that I can produce more honey with a 10-frame. I having kept both 8-frame and 10-frame, that the data doesn't really bear that out. Actually, I think you can produce just as much honey from an 8-frame as a 10-frame. I also, I guess one advantage of a 10-frame is that you have a little more leeway time in terms of you can check your hive maybe a little less often, especially during swarming season and times like that. Because the bees have a little more space to grow. So along with that 8-frame or 10-frame hive, I recommend that anybody that gets into beekeeping, get everything you need right from the start. So get at least 2 deep boxes. These are the deep boxes are generally where the queen lays her eggs, and they are on the bottom of the hive. And you super the hive, you add more boxes as the colony grows, you add them up top. So as your colony grows, you're going to add 2 medium boxes as well. So I recommend starting right away having those 2 medium boxes and 2 deep boxes. You can also get shallow boxes, which are even smaller boxes that are a little easier to lift as well. But I would recommend getting everything you see here, including a hive stand, bottom board, which your deep boxes will go on top of. The one thing I wouldn't recommend starting with, you can see in this picture, is a queen excluder. I wouldn't even worry about that in your first years. That really complicates things, and it actually ends up hampering the growth of beehives. So I actually recommend avoiding a queen excluder in the first years. If you buy a kit, you know, a whole hive kit, oftentimes it comes with it, just set it aside for the first year. And then you also need an inner cover, which is a wooden cover that basically keeps the outer cover, which is the weather protection for the hive. It keeps it from getting glued down by the bees or getting stuck to the top box. So that's really key, having all of those items. There we go. The right materials also include the tools of the hive. The hive tool is indispensable. We have 2 different styles of hive tool. You have a J-hook hive tool you can see at the top here, and then next to it you can see more of a paint scraper style. I recommend getting both and see which one works better for you. They're both about $6 to $7 a piece. So it's definitely worth getting that. A feeder. Why would you need a feeder for your bees? Well, it's to get your bees off to the right start. Sugar syrup is actually a really essential tool. If you've just plopped your bees into a hive and you have new frames in there that don't have any drawn out comb, it's going to take a long time for them to draw out that comb. And they're also, you know, if they don't, they're totally new to the spot. If they aren't able to access enough nectar right away, they're in serious danger of starving right off the bat. And you know, I've seen hives really struggle to get off the ground. I always recommend starting by feeding some sugar syrup to let the bees draw out their honeycomb. And to get them settled into a new spot. So this one here on the left is the primary sugar feeder that I use. You know, I make a simple syrup, just one part water to 1 part by volume sugar, and mix it up really well until the sugar's diluted, and I pour it in there, and this goes right inside the hive. Instead of you take a couple frames out temporarily, put this in, and then once they've gotten the start they need, you can pull this out and replace it with frames. Right next to it, you can see another style of feeder called a hive top feeder, where the bees come up through holes in the center, and they have a little screen they can climb in and out of the little reservoir that you fill up with sugar syrup. Another key tool that is often overlooked is an entrance reducer. It can be as simple as just a few blocks of wood, but you need to be able to open and close your entrance. And when you first put your bees into a new location, they're going to be quite weak, and there's not going to be much activity at the hive in the beginning. And you may not even realize your neighbor 3 miles away has a beehive, and his or her bees are likely to find your hive when it's in its early stages, when it's weak, and they may come and rob some of the nectar or pollen from your hive. Also, yellow jackets have become more and more of a problem. And also other types of hornets. We don't have the murder hornets, as far as I know yet, here on the East Coast. There hasn't been any Asian hornets here, but that's an entrance reducer is a key tool to, you know, getting your hive started and having it not be robbed out by other hives or pests. And a bee brush is actually comes in incredibly handy, especially when you're harvesting honey. You know, a nice soft brush that you can gently remove the bees off of your frames to take honey frames away from the hive and be able to extract your honey is really helpful. Personal protective equipment is key to having the right materials. Then I'd say the most important tool that every beekeeper needs is a smoker, and I consider that personal protective equipment. Bees communicate through pheromones, and anytime you disturb your hive, if you just tap on the lid, or you know, even if your hive's on a pallet and you step on that pallet, the vibrations of that pallet moving are going to cause all the bees in the hive to release an alarm pheromone. It's a sweet smell that smells a little bit like bananas, actually. So don't eat bananas before you go into your hives. But that alarm pheromone can really build up, and it calls the guard bees, the older bees, that are their role in the hive is to sting any threat to the hive. It calls them to come and sting. And also a smoker, so the smoker will cover up that alarm pheromone. You're masking that alarm pheromone. It also actually gives them the feeling that there might be a fire in the area, so their instinct is to immediately start consuming nectar. They fill up their belly so much that they really can't, it's difficult for them to get their body in the right position to sting you. And they actually become much slower and more lethargic or calmer. I also like to think of a smoker as my way to knock on the hive before I come in. I want to give them a few puffs of smoke from a familiar smell. I always use the same smoker fuel, and it's my way of saying, hey, I've been gentle with you in the past. I'm back, and and I find if I'm gentle and I work my hives efficiently without squishing bees, they seem to just get calmer and calmer the more I work them. A suit and a veil and gloves and boots all are essential personal protective equipment. I have them on hand. I honestly almost never wear gloves anymore, but I always have them on hand in case I encounter a hot hive. I need to have them, in case that I have a hive that is just stinging and stinging again and again. I also recommend anybody that's just getting started, you want to be as comfortable as possible. Beekeeping should be a Zen-like activity for you, because bees, like any other livestock, pick up on your nervousness. If you're nervous and you're jittery, they're going to be nervous and they're going to be jittery, and they're more likely to sting you. So wear everything you need to feel comfortable in the beginning. And if you can shed the gloves later on, great. But start by having it all on hand. The right knowledge is something that everybody's going to have to come to over time. You're not going to learn how to keep bees necessarily by reading books and watching YouTube videos alone. In my opinion, it's best to find a mentor. There's no better way to get into beekeeping than actually getting your hands in a hive or being there and seeing all these different various things that arise in a beehive. Over time, you want to be able to see it. And a great way to find a mentor is to seek out Beekeepers Association here in Connecticut. We have the Connecticut Beekeepers Association, doesn't meet very often, and it's a rotating association. They meet in various places throughout the state. Usually they have at least one fall meeting in Bethlehem per year. Also in Weston, Connecticut, there's a great Beekeepers Association called the Backyard Beekeepers Association. I was on their board for a number of years. It's an hour drive though, and so but it's a great association. And also we have the Catskill Mountain beekeepers over in Kingston, New York. So those are great places to find mentors. And again, I have to plug our class. I got really great feedback from the participants 2 years ago and before, that it was a great way to just get comfortable working a hive before, especially for people that didn't want to jump in and buy a hive right away. They got a year of experience working in our hives at Beavertides before moving on to start their own hives. So to me, a mentor and actually hands-on is the best way to develop that knowledge. And I wanted to give you just a few basics to sort of start you down that path. And obviously we definitely don't have enough time to go too in depth with this tonight. But I wanted to give you the basics of what's in a hive. In that, I'll cover the bees that you're going to find in your hive, the different castes of bees inside the hive, the beeswax brood, which is actually, you can see in this bottom picture here, capped pupa, the metamorphosis stage of brood, but also brood encompasses eggs and the larvae. And nectar and honey, their carbohydrate source, their energy source, and pollen, which you can see these beautiful different colors of pollen here. This picture was from one of our hives, and you can see the diversity of different pollen sources by looking at the pollen here. You see this beautiful crimson, some more bluish, yellow, more traditional yellow, white, and orange pollen sources. So starting off with the bees, there's 3 castes of bees. The predominant caste, 95% of the hive is worker bees. These are infertile females. They do every job under the sun. When they emerge, they come out, they start cleaning the cell that they emerged from. And they will be cleaner bees. They will be nurse bees and take care of the other brood as they get a little older. They may become queen attendants that follow the queen around and take care of the queen. They may, as they get a little bit older, they'll become builder bees when their wax glands develop. And they get a little bit older than that, they develop their sting. They may become a guard bee. And the last job that every bee does, generally for the last half of their life, is become foragers. Every worker bee will go out and forage for pollen, nectar, and water, and also tree resin to make propolis, the glue-like substance that glues a hive together. So that's workers in a nutshell. In the class that we teach at Beavertides, we go way more in depth into their life cycle and the many roles that they'll play throughout their lifetime. The next on the list would be sort of the reproductive center for the hive is the queen. There's generally always only one queen in a hive. There is occasions where you might have 2 queens at the same time, but generally if they find each other, it's mortal combat. They'll fight to the death. There's usually only going to be one queen, and her only role is laying eggs all day, every day. She'll lay up to 1,500 to 2,000 eggs at the peak of the season in a single day. The queen will move throughout the hive, and I included this picture here to show how there's constantly always sort of a retinue of worker bees following her around. And this is actually, you can see I've marked this queen with a red dot. This queen in this picture is marked with a green dot. That's how most beekeepers track the age of your queens. Every 5 years, there's a different color for every 5 years. Sort of an international queen marking system. I put that on her to track how old she is, and it also makes it a little easier to spot her. But it's still, and if you don't have a marked queen, it's really like Where's Waldo on steroids. That you can see her abdomen's a bit longer than a worker bee's, but she's not she really doesn't pop out if you're looking through 60,000 bees, on 30 different frames. It's not always easy to spot the queen. And the way I usually spot her is how all the bees are reacting to her. My eye is drawn after years of keeping bees to that retinue of the bees all turning and touching the queen with their antennae. What they're doing is they're picking up her pheromone to pass it throughout the hive and tell everybody else, they communicate through these pheromones that everything is copacetic. We have a healthy queen. The last bee here is the lowly drone, the only males in the hive. Their only role in life is reproduction and actually passing on the genetics of this hive outside of the hive. So when they reach a certain age, they'll leave the hive every day and go to what's called drone congregation areas. These are, the drones from different hives are drawn to each other by each other's smell, and they will kind of hang out in these drone congregation clouds of bees until a virgin queen comes flying through, and the fastest and the strongest of them will mate with her mid-flight. And so that's their role, is to pass on the genetics of their hive. They will not be mating with the queen in their own hive. It's only outside the hive that drones mate. So that's a basic overview of the three castes of bees. And I want to also give you a little bit of anatomy. I'm not going to, this is a very in-depth anatomy lesson, which we go over in the class, but I want you to get the basic overview. Usually when you're talking about bees, you're talking about, and most insects, ants are also segmented this way. The bee is segmented into three sections: the head, where the antennae, the eyes, and the mandibles, and also the proboscis, their tube-like tongue, or their straw-like tongue, are all located in the head. And then the thorax is their midsection. And this section, as you can see, is all muscle. The wings are attached on the thorax and the legs are attached on the thorax, but there is no organs. Even their heart is a dorsal heart. It's in their abdomen. This is that's the abdomen is the place on a bee that you never want to touch for multiple reasons. But if I'm going to pick up a bee, I'm going to pick her up by her thorax, by her wings, and by her midsection, because she's very strong and durable there. If I'm going to pick up a queen, especially to mark her, I never want to touch the abdomen, because her ovaries are also there, and you will make her infertile quite easily, actually. So that's a broad overview. There's a lot going on in the abdomen: the Nasonoff gland, the wax glands, which we'll talk about in a second, the digestive system. The honey crop is actually where, when bees collect nectar, they hold that nectar in the honey crop and then regurgitate it when they get back to the hive with the digestive enzymes that start the process of converting nectar into honey. So we have the bees. The other major component that makes up the hive itself is beeswax. And the bees actually make this wax from their own body. This is actually a picture I caught a number of years ago, where the bee is excreting flakes of wax out of her abdomen. She has 8 wax glands on her abdomen. And those little white flakes of wax, she passes up with her legs to her mandibles and chews it up. And this is actually called festooning. What they're doing is they're using gravity to draw out their comb. If you put in a frame that doesn't have most frames that beekeepers like myself use have foundation in it. They have sort of a starter sheet that has the imprint of the comb on it to get them started. It has embedded wires in it to hold that frame together when I'm extracting the honey out with the centrifuge. This is what you would see in a natural hive, or if you put in a frame that didn't have that foundation, they'll hang off of each other and build this perfect hexagonal comb. And they're the exact same size, to the point where if you look in the center of one of these cells, you'll see in a later slide, you almost see a Mercedes-Benz symbol, and that's actually the corners of the cells on the other side, just to show you how perfectly sized all these hexagons are in the comb they build. So the next thing that's in the hive, that bee comb is everything to the bees. It's where they're storing the nectar and pollen, but it is also their nursery. So the queen is going to lay eggs in the cells on the comb that they've built. It'll be an egg for 3 days, and that egg will hatch out into a teeny tiny larvae. This doesn't really represent it, though. When the larvae first hatches out, it's even smaller than this egg, which, in a real picture, you get a sense. This is one of the biggest challenges in beekeeping, is being able to recognize eggs, being able to see. You sort of develop an eagle eye for being able to see eggs, to see that you have a laying queen. But that'll be a teeny tiny larvae, and it's in a larvae stage for 5 to 6 days. That's the growth stage of the bee. She's going to go from being that teeny tiny larvae to filling the whole cell. And she actually has that larvae has silk glands in its mouth parts, just like a caterpillar. And she, along with the worker bees and nurse bees, will make a capping. And that's where the metamorphosis happens, where the larvae will turn into a bee in the pupal stage, which lasts about 12 to 13 days. And a lot of people call, you'll hear beekeepers refer to capped brood. Capped brood is pupa, basically. Uncapped brood is eggs and larvae. The whole cycle combined together for worker bees is 21 days. So after 21 days, you have a bee is born. So that's a very broad snapshot view, and we can field questions in a second here, but I want to leave you with a parting thought that I actually borrow from the book of Dr. Tom Seeley up at Cornell, Honeybee Democracy. So I don't know, well, I can't see you guys, but I don't know how many of you have ever seen this before. This is a swarm of bees. Basically, when a hive gets filled up with bees and they're run out of space for that colony to grow in their hive, they have no more room to grow inside of it, they're filled up with honey or brood, they'll actually split themselves. And really, you have to think of, you can't think of bees as individuals necessarily. The E.O. Wilson, the biologist, his term, a superorganism, is the best way to think of honeybees. Every bee in a hive is essentially like a cell in your own body. So the superorganism's reproduction is swarming. What happens is when they run out of space, they will start to make a new queen. And they'll lay eggs in a cell and start feeding it royal jelly to make a queen. And just before that new queen emerges, the old queen's going to take off with 40 to 50% of the hive. Many of the older bees are going to go with that old queen, and they're going to cluster up in a tree somewhere. What they're doing while they're in this cluster, this swarm, or another word for it is a bivouac. While they're in the bivouac, they're protecting the queen, and all the while they're sending out scouts looking for a new place to live. Generally, they're looking for a tree cavity, and they want the right volume of a cavity and the right sized entrance. Generally about 2-inch entrance is ideal for them. So if they find a site that they like a lot, they're going to go back. That scout's going to go back to the bivouac, and she's going to do a little waggle dance. And I'm sure many of you have heard of the waggle dance. She's going to walk in a figure 8, and when she's at a certain angle, she's going to waggle her backside. So the angle that she's doing that waggle phase in relation to straight up and down vertical is the same angle from this bivouac to the sun to that new nectar source. The amount of, or the distance that she's waggling is correlated with the distance from that bivouac. And they are actually able to give their sisters directions up to 3 miles away in any direction to go check out this tiny little hole in an oak tree, 3 miles away. And if the other scouts like that site, they're going to come back and they're going to do the same waggle dance. If while they're out, they find another site they like better, they're going to do a different waggle dance. So essentially what the bees are doing here in this swarm is voting for their favorite site. And they will not break cluster. They'll stay out there in the rain, they'll stay out there for days until they have reached a consensus and they're all doing the same waggle dance. And then you'll see, it's one of the most amazing sights I've ever seen is, when I recognized, I was about to catch a swarm once at Stone Barns, and I recognized they were all doing the same waggle dance. I said, oh man, I better catch this swarm quick. And sure enough, right before I reached to drop them into a hive, they just sort of fizzled away as one giant cloud of bees and flew across the pasture to the other side of the farm and went into an oak tree, never to be found again, or some cavity, never to be found again. But it was a pretty powerful sight, seeing them all move as one force. So I just kind of wanted to try and express a little bit of what I see as the beauty and miracle that you find the deeper you go into beekeeping. And I've been keeping bees now for a little over 13 years. And every year I learn more and more, and I become more fascinated by these creatures. And I hope that might be the case for some of you too. So with that, I want to remind you all that please visit our website, Beavertides Farm. We teach our beekeeping class will be starting up not too long from now, and we have a lot of the spaces are already filled. But and we also teach other classes in sort of backyard homesteading farming. We do a layers course, raising your own layer hens, a meat chickens course. And these are just one-off courses. They're not like the beekeeping course that go throughout the season. And we also want to invite people, to come and visit our farm. And we're doing pasture walks throughout the summer on Fridays, and various things like that. So please come visit our website and consider our class. So with that, maybe we can open this up for questions a little bit. Stop sharing my screen. I'm sure I know not answering questions this whole time. I'm sure a lot of questions have built up, and I've gone over my time. I apologize, but I don't know, Brittany, how long would you
Yeah, no, that was perfect. Thank you so much. You should all be able to unmute yourselves and you can turn on your videos. So please, any questions, go for it.
And I don't know if maybe if you want, you can also raise your hand on your screen or, oh my goodness, I lost you guys for a second. Or I don't know, you can also do a chat question and Brittany can help with this. Any questions? Check that chat.
I have a quick question about swarming. I know you briefly talked about it. I just started getting into beekeeping last year, had a huge issue with my hive swarming after several months. I also got a late start and my entire colony died. So I'm restarting fresh this year. My more question is, all I was reading and I was talking on beekeeper sites and links, the second brood box should go on when your first brood box is about 80% full. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't know. Were you keeping 10 frame?
Yes, 10 frames.
Frame hive. I actually usually when I get to 7, so that would be seven frames. Okay. When I get or 70% full, when I see 70% or 7 of the frames have been drawn out, I'll add that other box. But I also look for other signals. You know, especially in the spring, I am constantly looking at the bottom of every frame, and if a hive's going to swarm, they're first going to I don't know how far to go into this, but they're going to lay an egg in a cell that's facing vertically. It's pointing straight down, right? Mm-hmm. So if you see an egg or a larvae in a cell on the bottom of a frame pointing down as opposed to pointing horizontally, you know, the side of the frames, that's a sign that this hive's heading towards swarming. So you want to give them space right away. That's key.
Yeah, because I added the second brood box and it was going fine. The bottom one was almost 90% and they were 2 or 3 frames into the new brood box. It was going well. And then the queen cells were forming. At one point, there was like 17 queen cells I counted after one inspection. I was like, it was nuts. And then I tried, she swarmed, I tried 2 new queens and still nothing. They were bawling and they rejected her hardcore.
Yeah, that's a tough thing, is that you might have introduced a new queen and they may have started making their own queen. So when that queen emerged, they were already, when you put that new queen in there, they were already bonded with the young virgin queen that was emerging there. So they'll ball her, the new queen, and they'll attack her. They're going to side with the queen that's, you know, they're already used to. So oftentimes if somebody's going to re-queen, they're going to go through and double check there's no queen present.
Oh, I did. There was like two queen cells that looked like they hatched, and then I squashed a few remaining, and I still couldn't find the queen. I waited like 2 weeks, and then I introduced the new one, and still hit 2 queens, didn't work.
Yeah, there's something called a queen introduction frame. So that's a long cage. It's the length of a frame, and you can put your queen cage in there, and then the queen will release into there, and that gives them a real chance to get used to it. And I never release her from that queen introduction cage until I've looked and I've seen that they're reaching their antennae through and touching her. If they're touching her gently with their antennae, they want her to be their queen. They are considering her their queen. You'll see if they're going to reject that queen, they're going to be biting at that cage. They're going to be, you know, sticking their butt in there trying to sting her. So that's, you know, those, you can get those from all the beekeeping supply places. Just a queen introduction or a push-in cage is another thing. So it's a more gentle introduction.
Thank you. Next, I can't wait to start it up again this year. It was still fun. It didn't last too long. I'm still can't wait to get back into it.
Well, great. Yeah, I'm glad that you're sticking with it. Any other questions?
And Dan?
Yeah.
I've been keeping bees for a couple of years. We moved up from New York last year, and I just brought up 1 hive, and I'm going to have 2 more hives this year. I hope they've made it. This month has been very, very cold. do you do anything over the winter to wrap them or care for them? I wrapped my hive last year.
Yeah.
What does that
You
mean?
know, it's just the luck of the draw, I guess. You know, I didn't take
Yeah.
any honey off. I kept everything for
Yeah.
them.
I
So,
don't.
you know, they'd have that. And
Yeah. So they have a lot of honey
yeah,
stores.
so they have a lot of food and
You
just
know, it's
keeping my fingers crossed so I can check them.
yeah, it's funny, you know, you talk to commercial beekeepers who, you know, might wrap some of their hives and not wrap some, and they're like, it doesn't make a difference.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what I do, I'll tell you what I do for my hives in the wintertime. I do wrap them with tar paper insulation. And the reason why I don't wrap them with anything that's going to insulate the hive. You know, they sell commercial
Mhm, mhm.
wraps that are actually foam insulation.
Yes.
And I think the problem with that is when you get these warm days, when it's 50
Mhm.
degrees out, you want your bees to feel that. And you're basically keeping the cold air in on the warm days with the insulation. That's why I prefer just a tar paper wrap that sort of seals up all the cracks in the
Mhm.
hive. And I always make sure I have an upper entrance so they can get out no matter how deep the snow is and have their cleansing flights when it gets warm. Because
Yeah.
they're going to hold their poop in
Yeah.
until the end of the winter. And that's why you'll see orange spots on the snow outside your hive, especially after a nice warm day. And they're going to drag out any dead bees. So you want them to feel those warm days. Moisture is the biggest problem in the wintertime. So ventilation is really key. So that upper entrance really helps with ventilation. I also Homosoap board, which is basically if you go to a hardware store and ask for Homosoap or soundboard, it's like it's a paper-based board, or it's like a thicker cardboard. I put that on top because that's moisture absorbing. So I put it's like putting a hat on my hives. And that also absorbs any moisture as they respirate, any moisture that rises up in the hive. So those are the things I do. But like I said, it can be a real crapshoot.
Yeah, it
With
can.
overwintering
I
bees.
mean, some years I never did anything, you know, wrapping or
Right.
anything. I try to leave as much honey as I can. With my hive last year, I just had to taste it. I took one frame out, but that was
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And I figure I do it for the bees, not so much for the honey. If I get the honey, it's fun, but you know,
Yeah.
yeah.
I see a few questions in the chat box. Let me try and answer a couple of these real quick. What's the difference between, or how long does one live? And I'm assuming you're talking about the colony itself, Nancy.
Yes.
The colony can last for decades, you know, because as long as they're requeening themselves. That queen, I'm finding the longest queens I've ever had were 5 years, which is quite long. Most hives need to be requeened, and I say need to be. The hive itself may requeen the hive, or the beekeeper may requeen the hive. Every 1 to 2 years, usually every 2 to 3 years. But you know, a lot of the commercial beekeepers requeen their hives every fall, every year. But the hive itself, as long as it's it's maintained and they're queen right, they can last for, you know, decades, as long as we can last. I heard you mention swarming. Is that something we will be discussing? Yeah, just passing discussion, but definitely Phil will, in the class, I talk a lot more about swarming. There's a whole class dedicated to swarming and making artificial swarms or splits. What's the difference between the Langstroth beehive that I discussed and a top bar hive? Top bar hives that's the first hive I ever kept in the tropics, and they're really well designed for the tropics. I have had a lot of difficulty, to be honest, overwintering top bar hives in a northern climate, or at least in the Northeast. I think they do really great in US southern climates. The main difference is a Langstroth hive is a vertical hive. As the colony grows, you add more boxes on top. A top bar hive is a horizontal hive. So you actually have, in a top bar hive, it's an open space and it just has a top bar, and it's, a lot of biodynamic or natural beekeepers prefer top bar hives because the bees draw out all their own comb just from gravity from those top bars, and then you harvest it just using the crush comb method and crush it through a cheesecloth. Top bar hives, you usually have a follower board that you open up and give them more space vertically as the colony grows, or I'm sorry, horizontally as the colony grows. And what I found is they aren't able to get to the honey in the back. So let's say your entrance is in the front of the hive. They're generally going to store their honey towards the back because that's the farthest from the entrance, least likely for that to get robbed out. And they're going to store their brood close to the entrance because they want to be able to ventilate it and climate control that brood really well. So through the winter months, usually in a Langstroth hive, they're just going to work their way up to the honey as a cluster, as it's like a basketball, and they can just work their way up through the frames. With a top bar hive, they're having to break cluster a little bit to get around each frame. And I just generally find that I have a harder time overwintering them. So what type of cover crop would benefit the hive? Great question. Clovers, they do better on white clovers generally, or like yellow sweet clover. I plant in my pastures. I also always use buckwheat in all of my seed mixes in my pastures as a cover crop. It's fast growing, and that makes a wonderful forage for bees. Phacelia is also another good cover crop. It's a little more expensive. Let's see here. Other cover crops, nothing else is coming to mind at the moment, but Dutch white clover and buckwheat are a great way to go. And just trying to create diversity in your gardens and fields. Trees are a huge nectar source, so don't cut down that black locust tree, or plant linden trees, or some trees that are going to bloom at different times in the year. For my backyard hive, how much sun do you need? Ideally as much sun as possible, but I've kept hives very well, in pretty full shade. They tend to not get out flying as early as possible, but that's not critical. If you don't have good open sun, don't worry about that. If it's a dappled shade, that's fine for sure. They'll be a little slower to get going in the morning. Bees tend to keep banker's hours, not farmer's hours. They usually don't fly until later. Let's see, we have a pool on our property. Is that an issue? Yes, they may. For some reason, bees love the taste of chlorine. I don't know why. So they oftentimes use that as their water source. So if that does become the case, what I do is just go to Tractor Supply and get chicken water, like a little water drinker, or something, and periodically fill that up with your pool water, with the chlorinated water they like.
21 people
put
on
it
this
right next
call.
to the hives.
How many?
21.
There you go.
Put it right next to the hives so that it's closer to them, and they won't go to your, if that same smell and taste of water is right next to them, they'll go there first. Robert, you had a question?
Hi, yeah. I'm trying to figure out what role the queen plays in being chosen as the queen. does she fight for it, or does somebody anoint her?
A little bit of both. So I think it was, who was it that said earlier? Phil. Like Phil said earlier, when they are going to make a new queen, they're always going to hedge their bets. So whether they're, the queen gets damaged and they're making what are called emergency cells, or if the hive is full and they're making swarm cells, they're going to draw out multiple regular worker eggs. Genetically, a queen is exactly the same as a worker bee. The difference is the feed. So when they turn that cell from horizontal, they'll draw it out and point it downwards. It looks like a little peanut hanging off of the hive. They're going to do like 20 of those, the first to hatch out of those. And I'm sorry, so when they point those down, that's a signal to all the worker bees to feed royal jelly to that larvae. And that's what's going to help her develop her ovaries and set the queens apart from the worker bees. So when the first of those queens emerges, the first thing she's going to do is go around and seek out every other queen cell and sting it before it emerges. And if that queen looks healthy and she's strong, it's very Game of Thrones in the beginning here. So that she's going to go around and if the workers see she's strong and they like her pheromones and everything, they're going to go around and they're going to help her too. They're going to kill the other queens. If two queens emerge at the same time and they encounter each other, it'll be mortal combat. They'll fight and the strong survive. So I don't know. Does that answer your question, Robert?
Yes. There's no king involved, right?
I would not call the drones kings. In fact, so we talked about how they go to their drone congregation areas. When a virgin queen emerges, she's only going to be mated for 1 to 2 week period of her life. She's going to go out on these nuptial flights every single day, seeking these drone congregation areas. And she's going to fly through and she'll get mated by, 20 to as much as 40 different drones. The fun little fact, a drone's penis is barbed just like a worker bee's stinger is. So when he mates her, his penis is going to rip away and he's going to die. A lot of thanks for doing his one job in life. But that actually seals off his hive's genetics in that queen. So usually she'll only be mated by 1 or 2 drones. A couple can mate, a couple of drones might be able to mate her on a single flight, and then she'll go back to the hive and the workers will help her remove that endophallus. But that seals off his genetics. So there's actually function to that. I don't know if, shoot, I'm forgetting the actress's name. There's a great actress, I think she's French, and she has a great YouTube series. It's not dirty, I promise, called Green Porn, where she talks about different mating, different ways that animals mate. She does like an octopus and a praying mantis and black widow spider. But her one on bees is really great. Isabella Rossellini does. Porn. Yeah, check it out. It's worth a YouTube. Any books? Oh, I'm sorry. I skipped. Are bears the only, somehow I'm covering your question. Are bears the only animal threat to a hive? They're the biggest threat, I would say. Skunks are a bit of a threat, but they're not going to destroy your hive the way bears will. Bears will tear it apart. Skunks will scratch at the entrance, and when a guard bee comes out to see what's going on, she'll eat the bees. The skunk will eat the bees as they come out, that tends to make for really angry hives. Over time, that colony is going to get more and more angry and defensive. Other things, mice. Mice in the wintertime, I always have a 1/2 inch hardware cloth mouse guard on all my entrances, keeping mice from going into my hives, because they'll nest in the hive and really make a mess in there. And voles as well. We'll do that in the winter time. Any books, websites that we recommend? To be totally honest, I haven't finished it yet, but I'm putting together a nice resource list. Off the top of my head, the book I mentioned about swarming, Honeybee Democracy, is one of my all-time favorite books by Dr. Tom Seeley. Dewey Caron's book, Honeybee Biology, is a great book. Here in Bethlehem, Connecticut, we have Alphonse Avatable. He wrote a book with Diana Samatoro called The Beekeeper's Handbook. That's a great starter book. And actually, the Stories Guide to Keeping Bees, I think it was written by Kim Flottam, but those stories guides, that is actually a really great book. But I have a full resource list that I'll share if anybody emails me through our website. Beavertidesfarm@gmail.com is also our email address. If that's helpful, I'll write it in the chat. How can you keep skunks away? That's a good. Well, the primary way you can keep skunks away is by raising up the hive a little bit, getting it a little farther off the ground. If you're finding that scratching, you'll see actually the scratches on the front of the hive, and they're sort of chewed up entrance. So if you can put it on cinder blocks and get it a little higher, then they tend to leave it alone. Well, the other thing with that is it exposes their underbelly, which is not as well protected. So if they get stung there, they're less likely to keep bothering the hive. Yeah, go ahead.
Dan, I have Italian honeybees. I got them because I thought, and I think that they're very gentle. Do you recommend any other kind? Carnelians, Russians? I've been wanting to try, but I'm a little afraid.
So I think Italian honeybees are the standard bee that most people keep in the United States. They're popular because they're very gentle. They're fast growing. They grow the colony quickly, and they're really good honey producers. Their downsides are they're not as winter hardy. They tend to rob other hives more than the other breeds of bee or races of bees. And another drawback is they don't seem to stand up to varroa mites as well. Russians, I would say, on the other end of the spectrum, they are very hardy, but they're also very frugal, kind of maybe like I don't want to make gross generalizations here, but they tend to be more frugal. They can overwinter in a very small cluster. They're very, very hardy, and they're very mite resistant, very parasite resistant, but they are very, very aggressive. They're known to be very defensive. So that's the other end of the spectrum, and they're generally not as good of honey producers as Italians. And then sort of the happy middle ground is the Carniolan. The Carniolan comes from the Swiss Alps, and they seem to be in between. They're generally hardy. There's certain lines of Carniolans, particularly Sue Colby is a researcher at Washington State who developed a line of Carniolans called the New World Carniolan that is very hardy and is a good honey producer. There's also a line of Carniolans called Saskatraz that were developed in Saskatchewan that tend to be very good overwintering. I mostly run Carniolans myself, but I have a mix, and I think it really I don't favor one race of bees over the other. In fact, it's more about lines of bees. I found certain lines that this hive has done well for me. I'm going to make my splits from this hive. I used to raise my own queens, and I'm hoping to get back into that and share queens locally, but or sell queens locally. But a great queen source in the Northeast is a guy named Sam Comfort. He's out of Claverack, New York, so very close to here. And his business is called Anarchy Apiaries. I'll just write that in the chat group, and that'll also be on the resource list. Sam Comfort. Any other questions? Oh, how do you spell anarchy?
Thank you, Dan. This is so wonderful.
Do you have certain
Yeah.
technique you like to do to release your bees into the hive?
With setting up the package, the key, or releasing a package of bees, the key is just placing the queen beforehand. They're going to be drawn to that pheromone. I have, if it's a nice warm day, I sometimes have sprayed them with a little bit of sugar syrup beforehand, so that they sort of are calmer right from the start, and they coalesce more, that if they fly off a little less. But as long as that queen's there and you dump them right on top of the queen, I really just shake.
Okay, you shake them too? Okay, because someone told me, oh, you just put the cage into the hive, and then you put the lid on it and they'll come out. But I found they end up starting to make the cones inside their box.
Exactly. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so
I've had that happen. I tried that the first few years. I was like, this is too rough. I don't want to shake all my bees out. But I found that they didn't all come out as well. And once I had the mishap where I've made every mistake in the book, by the way. So they all,
that's how you learn.
That's how you learn. I had it happen once where I did that, where I left them in the package and I released the queen and put her above them inside the hive. And it was a cold night, and they just didn't find their way out, and not enough of them found their way out, and the queen actually died in her cage. So I did that with 2 boxes too, so maybe that was a problem.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. We have an 8-acre wildflower meadow. Would you recommend mowing this all in the fall, or mowing smaller sections periodically through the summer? Great question. Mowing is actually one of the worst things for the bees. The clovers but there's a balance there. The clovers and dandelions are great for honeybees. They make great forage, and also little things like henbit that the weed that you'll find, or plantain, your regular plantain that you find in your lawn. That is a great pollen source. I find if you can mow less often, and especially when you get to August and the goldenrod starts to bloom. I know a lot of people want to avoid letting their fields go to goldenrod because it can start to take over. But the goldenrod and New England asters, those are slower growing things. So I would maybe recommend laying off mowing until you get to October, and then mow it one more time for the winter. If in your if you have a meadow that you want to maintain. Less is more with mowing, in my opinion. My neighbors spray for ticks. Does this affect the bees? It depends on what they're spraying. And there's mixed reviews. A lot of people think that something that's safe for bees, actually, people like the researcher Marianne Fraser at Penn State would say, things that might necessarily be safe for bees, if they're exposed to it and they bring it back to the hive, a lot of the different pesticides or common pesticides or herbicides we use or fungicides even are fat soluble. So those get absorbed in our beeswax. Beeswax, that's the great sponge of our environment, and it's a lipid. So it's gonna absorb in the beeswax, and what can happen is these different chemicals can synergize over time. So it's basically like 1 + 1 now equals 5. It's making a more dangerous compound, or maybe it's a more benign. But these synergistic effects is what Dr. Marianne Fraser is looking at as being one of those causes of potentially colony collapse disorder. So cedar spray is something that is not a pesticide, and I think if it's sprayed directly on the hive or on the bees, obviously that's going to kill the bees, and that's not a good thing. But as long as it's the bees can have contact with that on the flowers, and that should be fine. Anytime you're spraying anything, actually, best practice is to do it in the evening hours when the bees have stopped flying, or very early in the morning before, like I said, they keep bankers hours. And if any pesticide you use, read the label. The label's the law. There should be a residual time on that, how long that's going to be in the environment, and there should also be a half-life of that. So on the bottle. And also you can always ask your neighbor to mow right before, so that's minimizing the flowers, the clover flowers and things before they spray, so that your bees are less likely to get exposed to it. But that's the part of being neighbors, and we have to try and try and work with our neighbors, bribe them with honey, tell them, communication's the best. Try and get them to tell you when they're going to spray, and try and share the best practices. Okay. I'm sorry.
Thank you.